Sometimes the things we leave behind hold the answers we've been searching for our whole lives. In the mudflats of Strandheim, an old rotting ship sat abandoned, ignored by everyone who passed by. Everyone said the ship was worthless. But when Borgar Thrymsson paid 2 silver coins for it, he wasn't buying junk. He was buying back his past. The giant Viking began tearing the ship apart with his hands. The townspeople laughed and called him a fool. They stopped laughing when he found the hidden chamber beneath the floorboards. Inside were treasures from unknown lands, maps drawn in gold, and something that made his blood run cold. A box carved with his family's rune, a blackened ring inside. The same ring his father wore the day he vanished 20 winters ago. What drives a man to search for answers he's afraid to find? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist hung low over Strandheim's harbour like the breath of sleeping giants. Borgar Thrymsson stood at the water's edge, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the smaller fishing boats bobbing nearby. At 6 feet 8 inches tall and built like the oak trees that crowned the northern mountains, he was a man who commanded attention without saying a word. Yet in this moment, with the salt wind tugging at his greying beard, he felt smaller than he had in years. The blackened ring sat heavy in his palm, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. He could still see his father's weathered fingers wrapped around it, could still hear Magnus Thrymsson's deep voice telling stories of distant shores and impossible adventures. 20 winters had passed since that voice fell silent. 20 winters since Magnus had walked into the forest one autumn evening and never returned. Still staring at that old thing, are you? Astrid's voice carried the warmth of fresh bread and the gentle reproach of a woman who had watched her husband chase ghosts for too long. She approached from behind, her footsteps sure on the wooden planks of the pier. At 53, she moved with the grace of someone who had learned to navigate both rough seas and rougher men. Her auburn hair, now threaded with silver, caught the morning light as she came to stand beside him. "It's his ring, Astrid." "I'm certain of it," Borgar's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "The scratches along the band, the way the metal has darkened near the center. I watched him wear this ring every day of my childhood." Astrid placed a gentle hand on his arm, feeling the tension coiled beneath his wool tunic. "Many rings bear similar markings, my love. The smiths in these parts have used the same techniques for generations." But Borgar shook his head, his pale blue eyes fixed on the horizon, where the morning sun painted the clouds in shades of copper and gold. "You didn't know him as I did." Magnus Thrymsson was not a man to abandon his family without word. He was not a man to simply vanish. The couple stood in comfortable silence, watching the harbour come alive with the day's first activity. Fishermen hauled their nets aboard weather-beaten vessels, their voices carrying across the water in the ancient rhythm of men who worked with their hands and trusted their lives to the sea. The smell of wood smoke drifted from the village chimneys, mixing with the briny scent of seaweed and the distant aroma of baking bread. Strandheim had been their home for 15 years, ever since Borgar had hung up his battle-axe and chosen the quiet life of a shipwright over the uncertain glory of raiding. It was a good life, honest work, that left him tired in his bones but satisfied in his spirit. He had built a reputation for crafting vessels that could weather the worst storms, ships that brought their crews home safe to waiting families. Yet there had always been a restlessness in him, a hunger that no amount of honest labor could fully satisfy. It was the same restlessness he had seen in his father's eyes during those long winter evenings when Magnus would stare into the fire and speak of lands beyond the horizon, of treasures that called to a man's soul like the song of distant whales. "Tell me about the ship again," Astrid said, though she had heard the story 3 times since yesterday evening. Sometimes a man needed to speak his thoughts aloud to make sense of them, and sometimes a wife needed to listen, even when the words carved worry lines deeper around her eyes. Borgar's gaze shifted to the mudflats where the longship lay like a beached whale, her hull dark with rot and neglect. Gunnar Eriksson found her 2 moons ago, half buried in the silt after the spring floods. Said she must have broken free from her moorings somewhere upriver and drifted down during the storm season. And no one claimed her? No one even looked twice. The hull's cracked in 3 places, her mast is long gone, and the deck planking has warped so badly you can see straight through to the bilge. Sven the shipwright called her firewood with delusions of grandeur. A smile ghosted across Astrid's lips despite her concern. Yet you saw something worth 2 silver coins. I saw her lines, the way her bow cuts through the mud even sitting still. This was no farmer's barge or merchant's tub. Someone built her for speed and distance, for cutting through ocean swells when lesser ships would founder. He paused, rolling the ring between his fingers. And I saw how the townspeople avoided her, the way they crossed themselves when they thought no one was looking. Superstition runs deep in fishing folk, perhaps. Or perhaps they sense what I'm beginning to understand, that some ships carry more than cargo. Some ships carry secrets. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. Erik Larsson, Strandheim's blacksmith and Borgar's closest friend, climbed the pier with the measured gait of a man whose knees had seen too many winters at the forge. His leather apron was already stained with the day's first work, and his grey beard showed traces of soot that no amount of washing ever quite removed. "You're up early, even for a man possessed," Erik called out, his voice carrying the dry humour that had sustained their friendship through 2 decades of shared troubles and celebrations. "Erik," Borgar nodded to his friend, then gestured toward the abandoned longship. "What do you make of her metalwork?" The blacksmith squinted against the morning sun, studying the vessel's few remaining iron fittings. "What little I can see from here looks well made. Proper steel, not the soft iron some of these coastal smiths pass off as boat hardware. The nail heads show good forging technique. Could you determine where it was made?" Erik stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Every smith leaves his mark whether he means to or not. The way he shapes the metal, the tools he favors, the methods passed down from his master. Give me a closer look at the ironwork, and I might be able to tell you which region, perhaps even which forge." This was more than Borgar had dared hope. "Would you walk down with me? I want to show you what I found yesterday." The 3 of them made their way down the gentle slope toward the mudflats, their feet finding purchase on the mixture of sand and shells that crunched beneath their boots. The tide was out, leaving the longship high and dry among the scattered debris that marked the harbour's edge. Up close, the vessel looked even more forlorn. Her once proud hull streaked with green algae and pocked with the holes left by shipworms. But Borgar moved around her with the reverence of a man examining a sleeping dragon. He ran his hands along her sides, feeling for the subtle curves that spoke of master craftsmanship beneath the decay. "Here," he said, pointing to where the stem post rose from the bow. "Look at the joint work." Erik knelt in the mud, heedless of his clean breeches, and examined the wooden construction with a craftsman's eye. "Fascinating. These joints are cut with precision I haven't seen since my grandfather's time. And the wood itself, this isn't local oak. The grain is too tight, the colour too dark. Northern timber," Astrid observed, surprising both men with her knowledge. At their questioning looks, she smiled. "My father was a ship's carpenter before the fever took him. He used to say that good shipwrights could read wood, like scholars read runes." Borgar felt a surge of warmth for his wife, followed immediately by the familiar pang of loss. Her father had been dead for 8 years, yet she still spoke of him with the present fondness that comes only to those who have made peace with grief. How different his own relationship with loss remained. How the absence of his father continued to gnaw at him like an infected wound. "Northern timber suggests a northern builder," Erik mused, rising to his feet and brushing mud from his knees. "But that doesn't narrow it down much. Could be anywhere from the Lofoten Islands to the shores of Greenland. There's more." Borgar led them to where he had pried up the floorboard the day before. The opening revealed a space, perhaps 2 feet square and half as deep, lined with what appeared to be sheets of copper that had turned green with age. "I found this chamber yesterday evening, just as the light was failing." Erik whistled low. "Hidden storage, and lined with copper to keep moisture out. This was meant to protect something valuable. It did its job well. Borgar reached into his pouch and withdrew the items he had discovered. The ring, a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins, and a piece of parchment rolled tight and bound with a strip of sealskin. Eric's eyes widened as he recognized the workmanship of the ring. "Borgar, my friend, where exactly did you say this ship came from?" "No one knows. Gunnar found her in the mudflats after the spring floods." "That's not possible." The blacksmith took the ring with careful hands, turning it toward the morning light. "I forged this ring 23 years ago for your father as a commission piece. He wanted something special, something that would last forever." The words hit Borgar like a blow from a war hammer. Astrid gasped and reached for his arm as if to steady them both. Around them, the normal sounds of the harbor seemed to fade into a distant whisper. "You're certain?" Borgar's voice came out hoarse. "I carved my mark into the inner band myself. See here?" Eric pointed to a tiny symbol, barely visible on the ring's interior surface. "The hammer and anvil that marks my work. This is your father's ring, without question." Borgar stared at the ring as if seeing it for the first time. Magnus Thrymsson had not simply vanished into the northern forests. Somehow, impossibly, he had found his way to a ship, sailed to unknown waters, and met his fate far from the familiar paths of home. But how? And why had the ship returned without him? "We need to examine everything," Astrid said quietly. "The parchment, the coins, everything in that chamber. If this ship truly belonged to Magnus, then perhaps it holds answers to questions we never thought to ask." The sun had climbed higher while they talked, burning away the morning mist and revealing the harbor in sharp detail. Fishing boats dotted the horizon like waterbirds, their sails full of the steady wind that promised good weather for those whose lives depended on the sea's favor. Yet for Borgar, the bright morning felt full of shadows, heavy with the weight of 20 years' worth of unanswered questions. He looked at his wife and his oldest friend, saw the concern and curiosity written equally in their faces, and made a decision that would change all their lives. "Then we examine everything, and we follow the trail wherever it leads, no matter how far from home it takes us." The abandoned longship creaked softly in the morning breeze, as if she too were eager to reveal her secrets. The parchment crackled like autumn leaves as Borgar unrolled it with trembling fingers. The three of them huddled together in the growing warmth of the morning sun, their shadows falling across the yellowed surface as it revealed its secrets line by careful line. The writing was in Magnus's hand. Borgar would have recognized those bold, angular strokes anywhere. His father had possessed the unusual skill of literacy, a gift passed down from a grandfather who had served as a scribe in the court of King Harold. But these words were not written in the familiar Norse runes. Instead, they formed letters in the Latin script used by monks and scholars, though the language itself seemed to shift between Norse and something else entirely. "Can you read it?" Astrid asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Borgar squinted at the faded ink, his lips moving silently as he worked through the unfamiliar script. "Some of it. Father taught me letters when I was young, though I never had much use for them." He pointed to a line near the top. "This part says something about the western shore of the sun's death and where the great waters meet the ice." Eric leaned closer, his blacksmith's eyes accustomed to examining fine details. "These symbols here between the words, they're not decorative. They look like navigation marks, the kind sailors use to record positions and distances." "A ship's log," Astrid breathed. "He was keeping a record of his voyage." Borgar continued reading, his frown deepening with each line. "He writes about following the whale road beyond all maps and discovering a land where the sun sleeps for half the year." Then here, his voice caught as he read a particular passage. "He says he found something that changed everything, something that made it impossible for him to return home." The weight of those words settled over them like a shroud. 20 years of wondering, of hoping that Magnus might simply walk back into their lives with tales of adventure and explanation for his absence, crumbled in the face of this stark truth. He had chosen not to return. Something in that distant land had been more important than his family, more compelling than the life he had built in Strandheim. What could be worth abandoning everything? Astrid asked, though her question was directed more to the wind than to her companions. Borgar's jaw tightened as he read further. He mentions a people called the Skraelings, and something about a great city built of stone and metal. But then the writing becomes urgent, hurried. He traced a finger along lines where the ink had been pressed deep into the parchment. He writes about being pursued, about needing to hide something precious before they catch him. They. Eric's voice carried the edge of a man who had seen his share of violence in younger days. He doesn't say who, but listen to this. The ring-bearers come in the night, and their hunger knows no bounds. I have hidden the heart of the mountain where only blood of my blood may find it. If these words reach home, know that I chose this fate to spare you all from a darkness that must never wake. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant calls of seabirds and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Each of them grappled with the implications of Magnus's final message, with the suggestion that his disappearance had been not abandonment, but sacrifice. Borgar's hands shook as he reached the bottom of the parchment. There, in letters pressed so deep they had nearly torn through the surface, were his father's final written words. To my son Borgar, forgive me. The ship knows the way home. Follow the maps, find the truth, but beware the price. Some treasures are better left buried. Your father, Magnus Thrymsson, in the land where winter holds dominion. The leather pouch that Eric had been examining suddenly felt heavier in the blacksmith's hands. He loosened the drawstring and poured the contents into his palm. 3 silver coins, unlike any they had seen before, stamped with symbols that seemed to shift and flow in the changing light, and a small piece of metal that gleamed with an inner fire despite its dark surface. This isn't silver, Eric said, his voice tight with excitement and fear. I've worked every metal known to our smiths, and I've never seen anything like this. It's warm to the touch, but not from the sun. The warmth comes from within. Astrid reached out tentatively, then pulled her hand back, as if the metal might burn her. What did your father find out there, Borgar? Before he could answer, a commotion from the harbor drew their attention. A ship was approaching from the east, its black sail marked with symbols that made the hair on Borgar's neck stand on end. The vessel moved with impossible speed, despite the light wind, cutting through the water as if pulled by invisible forces. That's not one of ours, Eric muttered, shading his eyes against the sun. I've never seen a ship move like that. The approaching vessel was perhaps 60 feet in length, built low and sleek like a predator designed for pursuit rather than cargo. Its crew stood motionless at their positions, their faces hidden beneath hoods that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the morning light. As it drew closer, Borgar could see that the symbols on the sail matched those on the strange coins his father had left behind. "They're coming here," Astrid said, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had learned to trust her instincts. "They're coming for the ship." Borgar's mind raced through the possibilities. The timing could not be coincidence. They discover his father's hidden chamber and its contents, and within hours a ship marked with matching symbols appears on the horizon. Either they had been watched for longer than he cared to consider, or forces beyond his understanding were drawing together like iron filings to a lodestone. "We need to move everything," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded warriors in battle. "The ring, the coins, the parchment, all of it goes with us. Now, where?" Eric asked, already gathering the precious items. Borgar looked at the approaching ship, then at the abandoned longship that had started this chain of revelations. "To my workshop. We can study everything properly there, and we'll have tools if we need to defend ourselves." "Defend ourselves?" Astrid's eyes widened. "Borgar, what aren't you telling us?" He helped her to her feet, his large hands gentle despite the urgency he felt. "Those symbols on the approaching ship, I've seen them before. In my nightmares, in the dreams that have plagued me since father disappeared. I never understood what they meant, but looking at them now, I know with certainty that whoever sails under that banner means us harm." The black ship had entered the harbor proper now, and Borgar could hear the sound of its passage, not the familiar creak of wood and rope, but something else entirely. A low humming that seemed to vibrate in his bones, accompanied by whispers in a language that hurt to hear. "The ring-bearers," he whispered, his father's words echoing in his memory. "They come in the night, and their hunger knows no bounds." But it was not night, it was broad daylight in a peaceful harbor where children played and fishermen mended their nets. The wrongness of the approaching vessel's presence was like a discordant note in a familiar song, a shadow falling across everything Borgar held dear. As they hurried up the slope toward the village, Astrid caught his arm. "Promise me something, husband. Promise me that whatever your father found, whatever drove him to sail beyond all maps, we'll face it together. No more secrets, no more mysteries that tear families apart." Borgar looked into her eyes, seeing the strength that had sustained him through 15 years of marriage, and the fear that came from loving someone who carried the blood of wanderers. "I promise. But understand this. I think we're about to discover that some mysteries are larger than any one family. Some secrets have the power to change everything." Behind them, the black ship had reached the pier, and figures in dark robes were already stepping onto the wooden planks with movements too fluid to be entirely human. The hunt that had begun 20 years ago in a distant land was about to resume on the familiar shores of home. Borgar's workshop stood at the edge of Strandheim like a fortress against the unknown. Built from thick oak timbers and roofed with slate from the northern quarries, it had weathered 15 years of coastal storms without yielding so much as a shingle. Inside, the familiar smell of wood shavings and linseed oil provided comfort against the strangeness of the morning's discoveries. Eric barred the heavy door behind them while Astrid moved to the small window that faced the harbor. Through the thick glass, they could see the black ship moored at the main pier, its crew spreading through the village like smoke, seeking every crack and crevice. "They're asking questions," Astrid reported, her voice tight with concern. "Going from door to door, showing something to the villagers." Borgar spread his father's parchment across his main workbench, weighing down the corners with iron tools. Under the steady light from the workshop's oil lamps, new details emerged from the faded ink. Between the lines of text, Magnus had drawn careful diagrams, star patterns, coastal profiles, and what appeared to be detailed maps of currents and wind patterns. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of symbols clustered near the bottom of the parchment. "These marks here, they're not Norse, not Latin, not any script I've ever seen. But they're repeated throughout the text, always in the same context." Eric joined him at the bench, setting down the strange coins where their unusual light could illuminate the parchment. "Whatever metal these are made from, it responds to the writing. See how the symbols glow brighter when the coins are near? Indeed, the mysterious script seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence when the coins drew close, as if recognizing something familiar." Astrid left her post at the window to examine this phenomenon, her practical mind already working to understand the connection. "Your father wrote about the heart of the mountain," she said, tracing one of the glowing symbols with her finger. "What if these coins are more than currency? What if they're keys of some kind?" The thought sent a chill through Borgar's massive frame. Keys implied locks, and locks implied something valuable enough to protect. But his father's warning echoed in his memory. Some treasures are better left buried. What had Magnus found that was so dangerous he chose exile rather than risk bringing it home? A sharp knock at the workshop door interrupted his brooding. All three of them froze, listening to the measured rhythm of someone who expected to be answered. When the knocking came again, it was accompanied by a voice that seemed to carry the weight of winter itself. "We know you are within, son of Magnus. We have come far to reclaim what was taken from us." Borgar motioned for silence, his hand moving instinctively to where his battle-axe hung on the wall. 20 years of peaceful craftsmanship had not dulled his warrior's instincts, and every sense now screamed of danger. "Open the door, shipwright. We mean no harm to you or yours, but we will have what belongs to us." The voice carried an accent unlike any Borgar had heard. with vowels that seemed to echo in impossible ways and consonants that clicked like breaking ice. Yet beneath the strangeness, he detected something that made his blood run cold, a tone of absolute certainty, as if the speaker had never encountered a door that remained closed to them. Eric had taken position near the window, a heavy hammer in his weathered hands. His blacksmith's strength might not match Borgar's warrior training, but he had never backed down from a fight in his life. Astrid gathered the coins and parchment, wrapping them carefully in oiled leather. "Son of Magnus," the voice came again, closer to the door now. "We know of the ship, of the chamber beneath her boards. We know of the trinkets your father left behind, but those baubles are nothing compared to what he truly stole from us." Borgar's jaw clenched at the word stole. Whatever his father had done in those distant lands, it had not been theft. Magnus Thrymsson had been many things: adventurer, dreamer, sometimes absent father, but never a thief. "You speak lies," Borgar called out, his voice carrying the authority that had once rallied men to follow him into battle. "My father was an honorable man." Laughter answered him, cold as winter wind across a grave. "Honorable? He slaughtered the guardians of the sacred grove, broke oaths older than your bloodline, and fled with the one thing that can never be replaced. But you have the chance to make amends for his crimes." "What crimes?" The words escaped before Borgar could stop them. "Come outside, Giant One, and we will show you. Bring the coins, bring the writing, and we will reveal truths that will reshape your understanding of the world. Or remain cowering in your workshop while we tear this village apart, stone by stone, searching for what we know you possess." Through the window, Eric could see villagers beginning to emerge from their homes, drawn by curiosity or fear. Old Gunnar the harbour master stood on his doorstep, talking animatedly with two of the robed figures. Children peered around their mothers' skirts, pointing at the strange ship with a mixture of wonder and unease. "They're not just here for us," Eric reported quietly. "They're making themselves at home, as if they plan to stay." Astrid moved to join her husband at the workbench, her hand finding his arm. "The villagers don't understand what they're dealing with. If these ring-bearers are as dangerous as your father believed, then I can't hide in here while innocent people suffer for my family's secrets." Borgar gathered the artifacts, securing them in a leather satchel that he slung across his massive shoulders. "But I won't hand them over without understanding what this is truly about." He moved to a section of the workshop's back wall where a seemingly solid oak panel concealed a hidden passage. Built during the early days of their marriage, when raiders still threatened the coast, the tunnel led to a root cellar beneath Astrid's herb garden, an escape route they had hoped never to use. "Eric, can you keep them talking? Make them think we're still considering their offer?" The blacksmith nodded grimly. "I've negotiated with enough difficult customers to buy you some time. But don't take too long. I don't think these are the type to appreciate being misled." "Where are we going?" Astrid asked as Borgar opened the hidden panel to find answers. "If my father's ship truly knows the way home, then perhaps she also knows the way back to where this all began." He helped his wife into the narrow passage, then turned back to Eric. "If we're not back by sunset, take your family and leave Strandheim. Head for your brother's farm in the mountains and stay there until this passes. And if it doesn't pass?" Borgar paused at the threshold of the hidden passage, considering the weight of his father's legacy and the price of truth. "Then at least you'll be alive to tell others what became of us." Outside, the voice had begun speaking again, but the words were no longer in any human language. The sound made the workshop's iron tools ring like bells, and somewhere in the harbour, the abandoned longship creaked as if responding to an ancient call. The root cellar smelled of earth and dried herbs, a sanctuary beneath the garden where Astrid had spent countless hours tending to the plants that sustained their household through long winters. Now it served as their hiding place while otherworldly voices echoed through the village above. Borgar crouched beside the wooden ladder that led to the surface, listening to the muffled sounds of Eric's conversation with the ring-bearers. His friend's voice carried the measured cadence of a man buying time, asking questions about their strange ship and the purpose of their visit. The responses came in that same unsettling accent, words that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to something deeper in the mind. "How long do we wait?" Astrid whispered, her practical nature warring with the impossibility of their situation. "Until dark. The old longship sits in the mudflats. If we can reach her without being seen, we might find more clues about where my father sailed and what he truly discovered." Astrid nodded, though her eyes reflected the fear they both felt. 24 hours ago, their greatest concern had been whether the summer's fishing would be plentiful enough to sustain the village through winter. Now they huddled in a cellar while beings from her husband's nightmares walked the streets above. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Through the thin wooden slats that allowed air into the cellar, they could see the shadows shift as the sun traced its arc across the sky. Occasionally, footsteps passed overhead, sometimes the familiar tread of villagers going about their business, other times the unnaturally quiet movement of the robed figures. As twilight approached, Borgar carefully lifted one of the slats to peer outside. The herb garden appeared empty, though the strange humming that had accompanied the black ship's arrival now seemed to permeate the air itself. In the distance, he could see lights beginning to flicker in the village windows, normal, comforting signs of evening routines that felt almost surreal given the morning's events. "Now," he whispered, helping Astrid climb the ladder, they emerged into a world transformed by shadow and uncertainty. The familiar paths between houses seemed foreign in the dying light, and every movement in their peripheral vision might have been a neighbor heading home or something far more dangerous. They kept to the edges of the village, using hedgerows and garden walls for cover as they made their way toward the harbor. The abandoned longship looked different in the twilight, less like a derelict vessel and more like a sleeping creature waiting to wake. The tide had come in during the day, lifting her partially free from the mud that had held her captive. Water lapped against her hull with a rhythm that seemed almost like breathing. "She's beautiful," Astrid said quietly, seeing the ship's true lines now that darkness had hidden her decay. "Beneath all that rot and damage, you can see what she once was." Borgar nodded, running his hands along the carved stem post. In the fading light, he could make out details that had been obscured by harsh daylight, intricate knotwork patterns that spoke of master craftsmen and symbols that matched those in his father's parchment. This had been a ship built for long voyages, designed to carry her crew safely across oceans that tested both vessel and soul. They climbed aboard, their feet finding purchase on planks that groaned but held firm beneath their weight. The hidden chamber where Borgar had found his father's relics yawned open like a mouth waiting to reveal more secrets. But now, with the strange coins in his possession, he noticed something he had missed before. The copper lining of the chamber wasn't merely protective, it was inscribed with the same script that decorated his father's parchment. And when he brought the coins near, the inscriptions began to glow with that same Ishari luminescence. "It's a map," Astrid breathed, tracing the glowing lines with her finger. "Look, this could be a coastline, and these marks might indicate safe harbors." Borgar studied the pattern, his mind working to interpret what his father had hidden in plain sight. The glowing script formed clear navigational information, star positions, tidal markers, and distance calculations that would allow a skilled navigator to retrace a specific route. "The ship knows the way home," he murmured, repeating his father's words from the parchment. "And not just to Strandheim, but to wherever Magnus sailed 20 years ago." A sound from the village made them both freeze, voices calling out in that strange, clicking language, growing closer to the harbor. Through the gathering darkness, they could see lights moving among the houses, a systematic search that would inevitably lead to the waterfront. "They're coming," Astrid said, her voice tight with controlled fear. Borgar made a decision that would have seemed impossible that morning. "Then we leave. Tonight, we follow my father's route and find the truth for ourselves." "Leave Strandheim?" Astrid's eyes widened. "Borgar, this ship has been rotting for months. She can't possibly be seaworthy. Look at her now." He gestured to where the rising tide had lifted the longship's bow. The water has swollen the wood, sealed the minor cracks. Her hull is sound. It's only the deck planking that suffered from exposure. Indeed, the ship seemed to be responding to the water's embrace, settling into the element for which she had been designed. The groaning of stressed timber had given way to the subtle creaking of a vessel finding her balance. "But we know nothing of sailing such distances," Astrid protested, even as her practical mind began calculating what supplies they would need. "My father's parchment contains detailed navigation notes. And I've spent 15 years building ships. I understand how they move through water better than most sailors understand the sea itself." Borgar moved to examine the ship's remaining rigging. "We have perhaps 2 hours before the search reaches the harbor. If we're going to attempt this, we need to prepare quickly." The sound of voices grew closer, accompanied now by the splash of boots in shallow water. Someone was checking the smaller vessels moored at the harbor's edge, working methodically toward the mudflats where the long ship waited. Astrid looked at her husband's face in the starlight, seeing the determination that had drawn her to him 15 years ago. This was the man who had once led warriors into battle, who had chosen love over glory and built a peaceful life with his own hands. If he believed they could sail into the unknown and return with answers, then perhaps the impossible was simply another challenge to overcome. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. The relief in Borgar's eyes was answer enough. Together, they began preparing for a voyage that would take them far from everything they knew, following a trail of mysteries that stretched across dark waters to lands where winter held dominion. The longship cut through the dark waters like a knife through silk, her ancient timbers singing with the joy of purpose rediscovered. 3 days had passed since they fled Strandheim under cover of darkness, and the vessel that had seemed ready for the scrap heap now moved with the grace of her youth. Borgar stood at the steering oar, his massive frame silhouetted against the star-filled sky as he followed the course laid out in his father's glowing map. The strange coins, suspended in a net bag beside the compass, pulsed with gentle light that intensified whenever they changed direction toward their mysterious destination. Astrid had proven herself an able sailor, her quick mind adapting to the rhythms of wind and wave with surprising ease. She managed the single sail they had rigged, adjusting its angle to catch every breath of favorable wind while avoiding the stronger gusts that might strain the ancient rigging beyond its limits. "The water tastes different here," she called out, having just tested a sample they had drawn up in a bucket. "Saltier, but with something else. Something that makes my tongue tingle." Borgar nodded grimly. According to his father's navigation notes, they were entering waters that appeared on no known charts, sailing beyond the familiar coastal routes into regions where the very sea itself carried traces of mystery. The stars above them seemed brighter than normal, arranged in patterns that almost made sense before shifting into configurations that belonged to no earthly sky. "We should see the first marker soon," he said, consulting the parchment again. Father wrote about the stone that weeps fire appearing on the port side after 3 days of sailing due west. As if summoned by his words, a glow appeared on the horizon, not the warm yellow of sunrise, but a cold blue radiance that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. As they drew closer, the source became clear, a pillar of black stone rising from the waves like a finger pointing toward the heavens. Its surface veined with minerals that glowed within a fire. "Impossible," Astrid whispered, staring at the phenomenon. "Stone doesn't burn underwater." Yet there it stood, defying everything they thought they knew about the natural world. The pillar rose perhaps 50 feet above the water's surface, its base lost in depths that appeared to stretch down far beyond what the surrounding ocean should allow. Fish swam around it in perfect spirals, their scales reflecting the strange light in patterns that hurt to watch for too long. Borgar steered them closer, following his father's instructions to pass within a ship's length of the stone marker. As they approached, he could hear something that made his skin crawl, a low humming that seemed to emanate from the pillar itself. vibrating through the water and into the ship's hull. The same sound, Astrid said, her face pale in the blue light. The same humming we heard from the black ship in Strandheim. The realization struck them both with chilling clarity. Whatever force had created this impossible stone marker was connected to the beings who had come seeking Magnus's stolen treasure. They were sailing directly into the heart of something far larger and more dangerous than either had imagined. But there was no turning back now. Behind them, the waters they had crossed showed signs of disturbance, dark shapes moving beneath the surface, following their wake with patient determination. The ring-bearers had not given up their pursuit simply because their quarry had taken to the sea. "Look at this," Astrid said, pointing to a section of the ship's hull near the waterline. "The wood is changing." Indeed, where the strange luminescence from the stone pillar touched the longship's ancient timbers, the rot and decay seemed to be reversing itself. Gaps between planks sealed themselves, weakened beams grew strong again, and the overall structure of the vessel became more solid with each passing moment. "Father's ship is healing herself," Borgar marveled. "Whatever force flows through these waters, it's restoring her to what she once was." The transformation was both wonderful and terrifying. If the ship could be restored by proximity to these mysterious energies, what effect might prolonged exposure have on living flesh? Already Borgar felt changes in himself. His vision seemed sharper in the strange light, his hearing more acute to the subtle sounds of wind and wave. But along with these enhancements came a growing sense of displacement, as if he were becoming something other than the man who had left Strandheim. As they passed the stone pillar, the coins in their net bag suddenly blazed with brilliant radiance. The light was so intense that both Borgar and Astrid had to shield their eyes, and when it faded, they found that new details had appeared on Magnus's parchment map. More navigation markers, Astrid observed, studying the fresh script that had materialized. And something else, warnings, I think. Borgar read the newly revealed text, his father's familiar handwriting now glowing with the same blue fire that surrounded them. He writes about the price of passage, and warns that each marker demands its due. Then here, beware the song of the deep currents, for they sing of things better left sleeping. Even as he spoke, they began to hear it, a melody that seemed to rise from the ocean depths, wordless but filled with meaning that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to the soul. It was beautiful and terrible, promising revelations that would transform the listener, while warning of the cost such knowledge would exact. "Cover your ears," Borgar commanded, though he found it nearly impossible to follow his own advice. The song pulled at something deep within him, awakening hungers he had never known he possessed. Astrid struggled to resist the melody's call. Her hands clamped over her ears as she fought to maintain her sense of self. Around them, the sea itself seemed to respond to the music. Waves formed patterns that resembled ancient runes, and the foam that crested their peaks glowed with the same cold fire as the stone pillar. "How much farther?" she managed to ask through gritted teeth. Borgar forced himself to focus on the navigation notes, fighting against the song's hypnotic pull. "According to Father's map, we should reach the second marker by dawn. After that," he paused, reading lines of text that seemed to shift and change even as he watched. "After that, we enter waters where the laws of nature hold less sway, where the old powers still walk freely." The implications of those words settled over them like a shroud. They had crossed from the world they knew into something else entirely, following a path that Magnus had walked 20 years before. Behind them, the pursuing shapes in the water drew closer, while ahead lay mysteries that had claimed Borgar's father and might yet claim them all. But the ship sailed on, her ancient purpose renewed, carrying them toward whatever truth lay hidden in the lands where winter held dominion. Dawn came like no dawn they had ever witnessed. Instead of the familiar golden light of sunrise, the sky lightened to a peculiar silver that cast no shadows, as if the sun itself had forgotten how to shine properly in these waters. The sea stretched, endlessly in all directions, its surface smooth as polished glass, and reflecting a sky that seemed too vast, too empty. The second marker rose from the depths ahead of them, not a pillar this time, but something far more unsettling. It appeared to be a ship, ancient beyond measure, its hull encased in what looked like crystal or ice. Yet as they drew closer, Borgar realized the truth was far stranger. The vessel was suspended in a column of water that refused to mix with the surrounding sea, held upright in a transparent prison that extended both above and below the surface. "How long has it been there?" Astrid whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the unnatural stillness. The trapped ship bore the unmistakable lines of Norse construction, but its style predated anything in Borgar's experience. Dragon heads carved with impossible detail crowned both stem and stern, their eyes seeming to follow the approaching longship, with awareness that transcended mere craftsmanship. Runes covered every visible surface, not the familiar Elder Futhark that Borgar had learned from his father, but something older, more primal. "Look at the crew," Astrid said, her face pale with shock. Indeed, figures could be seen on the trapped vessel's deck, preserved in the same crystalline substance that held their ship captive. They stood at their posts as if caught in the middle of their duties, their faces turned skyward in expressions of terror and wonder. Yet something in their posture suggested they were not truly dead, merely suspended, waiting for some signal to resume their interrupted voyage. As their longship passed close to the second marker, Magnus's coins began to sing, a high, clear note that seemed to resonate with the trapped vessel. In response, one of the preserved figures turned its head, ancient eyes focusing on Borgar with recognition that spanned centuries. The lips of the figure moved, forming words in the old tongue. "Son of Magnus, bearer of the tokens, beware the choice that claims all sons. What your father sought to protect, you carry toward its awakening." The voice carried across the water, with impossible clarity, speaking directly into their minds rather than their ears. Borgar felt the weight of prophecy in those words, the suggestion that his journey was not one of discovery, but of fulfillment. That he was not seeking answers, but delivering something that had always been meant to reach its destination. "What?" "A choice," he called back. But the figure had already returned to its eternal vigil, leaving only the memory of its warning echoing in the silver air. The preserved ship began to fade as they sailed past, becoming translucent before vanishing entirely, leaving only a patch of disturbed water to mark its passage. Yet the encounter had triggered new changes in their own vessel. The longship's dragon head, which had been broken and weathered when they began their voyage, now gleamed with fresh carving. Its eyes held a spark of the same awareness they had seen in the trapped vessel. "She's more than healing," Astrid observed, running her hand along the newly restored railings. "She's remembering what she was meant to be." Borgar nodded, though the transformation filled him with unease. If the ship was awakening to its true nature, what did that mean for the people aboard her? He could feel changes in himself as well. His thoughts moved faster. His perception of the world around them had sharpened to an almost painful degree, and occasionally he found himself understanding concepts that should have been beyond his knowledge. The third day in these strange waters brought them to a realm where the very nature of the sea began to shift. The water beneath their keel no longer felt like water at all, but something denser, more alive. Occasionally, shapes would form in its depths, vast geometric patterns that suggested intelligence at work, arranging the elements of creation according to principles that human minds could barely grasp. Astrid spent hours studying the new sections of text that appeared on Magnus's parchment with each marker they passed. The navigation notes were becoming less about wind and current, and more about concepts that challenged the basic assumptions of reality. Her father's training as a ship's carpenter had included some knowledge of navigation, but these instructions spoke of following flows of intention and currents of possibility. Here, she said, pointing to a passage that had materialized during their encounter with the second marker. Your father writes about the guardians of the threshold and warns that they will test our worthiness to proceed. He says, the final approach requires sacrifice of certainty and the courage to become more than what we were. The words carried an ominous weight that neither of them fully understood, but their meaning became clearer as the day progressed. The pursuing shapes that had followed them from Strandheim were drawing closer, no longer content to remain hidden beneath the surface. Dark forms broke the water's surface with increasing frequency, revealing glimpses of the ring-bearer's true nature. They were not entirely human, perhaps had never been human. Their movements flowed like liquid shadow, and where they touched the water, it turned black as winter night. Their voices, when they called across the distance, spoke in harmonies that no human throat could produce. "Son of Magnus," their leader called, its words carrying despite the distance between vessels. "You flee toward your doom, carrying keys to locks that should remain sealed. Turn back now, and we will grant you the mercy we denied your father." "What mercy?" Borgar shouted back, his voice carrying the rage of 20 years' worth of unanswered questions. "The mercy of ignorance, the mercy of remaining human." The words struck like physical blows, suggesting that Magnus's fate had been transformation rather than death, that whatever lay ahead would change anyone who reached it beyond all recognition. Yet even as fear clawed at his heart, Borgar felt the pull of his father's legacy, the need to understand what had driven Magnus to choose exile over family. As the silver day faded into something that was not quite night, they approached the coordinates, where Magnus's map indicated the final marker should appear. The water around them began to glow with phosphorescence that formed patterns too complex for coincidence, and in the distance a sound began to build. Not the song of the deep currents they had encountered before, but something far more powerful. It was the sound of awakening, of something vast and ancient stirring from slumber that had lasted since the world was young. The final marker was not a stone pillar or a trapped ship, but an island that existed in defiance of every natural law. It rose from the phosphorescent waters like a mountain of black glass, its surface reflecting not the silver sky above, but scenes from times and places that had never been. As their longship approached, Borgar could see forests that burned with cold flame, cities that floated in empty air, and figures that moved with the fluid grace of dreams made manifest. "This cannot be real," Astrid whispered, though her words lacked conviction. After 3 days in waters where reality bent like heated metal, she had learned to suspend disbelief. The island's shore consisted of sand that chimed like bells beneath. The waves, each grain catching and holding light that came from no visible source. Ancient ruins crowned the island's peak, not the familiar stone circles of their homeland, but structures that seemed to grow from the living rock itself, their geometries following principles that made the eye water to follow. As they drew closer to shore, Magnus's coins began to vibrate with such intensity that the net holding them threatened to tear. The parchment map burst into flames of blue and gold, revealing text that had been hidden beneath layers of seemingly blank paper. And there, written in letters that burned themselves into Borgar's vision, was the truth that shattered everything he thought he knew about his father's journey. "I was not the first to seek the heart of the mountain," Magnus had written in script that writhed like living things. 20 generations of our bloodline have answered the call, each believing themselves to be explorers when they were truly pilgrims. The Thrymsons are not seekers of the treasure. We are its guardians, bound by oaths older than memory to ensure it never falls into the wrong hands. Astrid read over his shoulder, her face growing pale as the implications became clear. "You mean your family has been doing this for centuries?" Borgar finished, his voice hollow with shock. "We're not discovering some ancient secret. We're fulfilling a responsibility that was passed down through our bloodline. Generation after generation, the burning text continued to reveal itself. layer upon layer of hidden truth. The ring-bearers speak truth when they say I stole from them, but their truth is incomplete. I did not steal the heart, I prevented its theft. They are the remnants of an empire that fell when the old powers withdrew from the world, and they seek to reclaim what they believe was stolen from them by right of conquest. But if that's true, Astrid said, struggling to understand, then why did Magnus never return? Why didn't he come home and explain? The answer appeared even as she asked the question, written in letters that seemed to weep. The guardianship demands a price that cannot be paid while remaining unchanged. Each guardian must choose: preserve their humanity and fail in their duty, or transform into something capable of protecting the heart across centuries. I chose transformation, and in doing so chose exile from everything I loved. Borgar felt the world tilting around him as the full weight of his father's sacrifice became clear. Magnus had not abandoned his family out of greed or wanderlust. He had given up his humanity to protect something that threatened the very fabric of reality. And now that burden was passing to the next generation. The island, he said, looking at the black glass mountain that loomed before them. That's where he is, isn't it? That's where the guardians go. As if summoned by his words, figures began to appear on the island's shore. They moved within human grace, their forms shifting between human and something else entirely. Yet even transformed, Borgar recognized the familiar set of one figure's shoulders, the distinctive way another held his head. These were Thrymson's, his ancestors stretching back through centuries of guardianship, and there, standing slightly apart from the others, was a figure Borgar knew with bone-deep certainty, despite 20 years of absence. Magnus Thrymsson, no longer entirely human, but still recognizably the father who had taught him to work wood and read the stars. The pursuing ring-bearers had drawn close enough now that Borgar could see them clearly. They too had once been human, but their transformation had taken a different path. Where the guardians retained some semblance of their original forms, the ring-bearers had become something alien, their features flowing like liquid shadow beneath their robes. "Enough!" their leader called across the water, its voice carrying harmonics that made reality shiver. "The cycle ends here, Guardian Spawn. We have grown tired of this endless dance, this pretense that mortals can stand against powers that shape the cosmos." Magnus stepped forward on the shore, his voice carrying clearly despite the distance. "My son," he called, and despite his transformation, the love in those words was unmistakably human. "You should not have come. The burden was mine to bear. I came seeking answers," Borgar replied, his voice carrying across the supernatural stillness. "I found you instead, and now you understand the choice that faces every Thrymson. The heart of the mountain lies within the island's core, a fragment of creation's first fire that must never be allowed to return to those who would use it to unmake the world. Will you take up the guardianship, knowing it means leaving behind everything you are?" Astrid gripped Borgar's arm, her eyes blazing with fierce determination. "There has to be another way, some solution that doesn't require you to abandon your humanity." But even as she spoke, the ring-bearer's leader was raising something that gleamed with terrible purpose, a staff crowned with the same strange metal as Magnus's coins, but corrupted, twisted into shapes that hurt to perceive. Dark energy began to gather around it, and the very air started to tear like fabric. "We have waited long enough," the ring-bearer declared. "If the guardian will not yield the heart willingly, we will take it by force and scatter his bloodline to the winds." The staff discharged its energy in a bolt of pure negation that struck the water between the two vessels. Where it hit, the sea simply ceased to exist, leaving a void that revealed the crushing depths beneath. The longship lurched as reality reasserted itself around the wound in existence. And Borgar realized with horror that this was only a demonstration of their power. "The choice is before you, son of Magnus," the ring-bearer continued. "Surrender the keys you carry and accept swift death, or watch as we tear apart the barriers between worlds in our search for the heart." Magnus had begun to glow with the same blue fire that had marked their entire journey. his transformed nature revealing itself fully. Around him, the other guardians took positions that suggested preparation for battle, their own inhuman abilities manifesting as reality bent to accommodate their presence. "Father," Borgar called out, his voice carrying all the pain of 20 years' separation, "is there truly no other way?" The answer came not from Magnus, but from the island itself, as the black glass surface began to resonate with deep harmonics. Images flashed across its reflective face, glimpses of a cosmic war fought in the dawn times, of powers so vast that their conflict had scarred the very structure of existence. And at the center of it all, a fragment of the original creative force, the heart of the mountain that both sides sought to claim. "There is one other way," Magnus said, his voice heavy with sorrow and hope in equal measure. "But it would require a sacrifice far greater than any guardian has ever made. It would require—" His words were cut off as the ring-bearers launched their attack, dark energy tearing through the supernatural calm like claws through silk. The battle for the heart of the mountain and for the fate of reality itself had finally begun. The battle that erupted around the Black Glass Island defied every concept of warfare Borgar had ever known. The ring-bearers struck with forces that unraveled the very fabric of existence, their dark energy weapons tearing holes in reality through which alien geometries bled into the world. In response, the guardians on the shore wielded powers that bent natural law to their will, turning sand into crystalline spears and calling forth barriers of solidified time. Yet despite the cosmic scale of the conflict, Borgar found himself focused on a single, devastating realization. Both sides were fighting over something that lay buried beneath the island's surface, something so powerful that its mere existence warped the space around it. The heart of the mountain was not simply a treasure, it was a fragment of the creative force that had shaped the universe itself. "We have to reach the shore," he told Astrid, his voice barely audible over the sounds of reality being torn asunder. "Whatever choice I'm meant to make, it can't be made from here." Astrid nodded, though her face was pale with the strain of witnessing forces that human minds were not meant to comprehend. She helped him adjust the longship's sail, steering them through waters that now churned with unleashed energies. Behind them, one of the ring-bearer vessels simply ceased to exist, as a guardian's defensive strike removed it from the timeline entirely. As they approached the singing shore, Borgar could see Magnus more clearly. His father had become something magnificent and terrible, his form shifting between human and elemental force, as he wielded powers that made the air itself burn with cold fire. Yet in his transformed features, Borgar could still see traces of the man who had taught him to carve wood and read the patterns of migrating birds. 20 generations, Magnus called out as their longship ground against the chiming sand. 20 generations of Thrymsons have stood guard against the return of the old empire. Each of us faced the same choice you face now. Borgar leaped from the ship onto the shore, feeling immediately the wrongness of the place. The sand beneath his feet was not composed of worn stone and shell, but of crystallized moments, fragments of time that had been shattered and left to accumulate over countless ages. Each step crunched through memories of events that had never quite happened, possibilities that had been abandoned before reaching fruition. "What exactly am I choosing between?" he demanded, helping Astrid onto the unstable shore. "Transform like you did or watch the world end?" "Neither," Magnus replied, gesturing toward the island's peak, where the ancient ruins pulsed with internal light. "There is a third path, but it requires understanding what the heart of the mountain truly is." Around them, the battle continued to rage. The ring-bearers had brought more than ships. They commanded creatures that existed partially outside normal space, beings that could strike from directions that didn't exist in conventional geometry. Against them, the Guardians fought with weapons forged from compressed starlight and shields woven from the dreams of sleeping gods. Yet for all the cosmic scope of the conflict, it was the human elements that drew Borgar's attention. He could see the cost of guardianship written in every transformed face, the isolation, the gradual loss of everything that had once made them human. They had gained the power to protect reality itself, but at the price of no longer being truly part of the reality they protected. "Show me," he said to Magnus. "Show me what lies beneath the island." His father nodded and began to glow with intensified radiance. The black glass beneath their feet became transparent, revealing the island's interior structure. What Borgar saw there took his breath away. Not a simple treasure chamber, but a vast geometric construct that extended through dimensions he couldn't name. At its center, suspended in a matrix of crystallized possibility, hung something that hurt to look at directly. The heart of the mountain was not a physical object at all, but a concept given form, the principle of creation itself, captured and contained at the moment of the universe's birth. It pulsed with potential that could reshape reality according to the will of whoever wielded it, making gods of mortals and mortals of gods. The old empire sought to use it to remake existence in their image, Magnus explained, his voice carrying harmonics that bypassed hearing and spoke directly to understanding. They would have turned the entire cosmos into a reflection of their hunger, leaving nothing but endless consumption where once there was beauty and growth. "And the Guardians?" Astrid asked, her practical mind cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "What do you do with it?" "We ensure it remains sleeping. The heart can only be awakened by one who understands both its creative and destructive potential, who can choose freely between power and sacrifice. That is why it must be guarded by those who have already chosen sacrifice. We cannot be tempted by what we have already given up." Borgar felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on his shoulders like a mountain. Every Thrymsson before him had faced this moment, this terrible choice between personal happiness and universal protection. Yet something in his father's words suggested there might be another possibility. "You mentioned a third path," he said. "Something that would require a greater sacrifice than any guardian has made." Magnus's transformed features showed something that might have been hope. The heart was never meant to be guarded forever. It was meant to be returned to the source from which it came, merged back into the fundamental structure of reality, where it could no longer be stolen or misused. But to do that would require someone to carry it beyond the boundaries of existence itself, to the place where the universe touches the void that preceded creation. Such a journey would unmake the traveler completely, but it would also ensure that the heart could never again threaten the stability of what is. The implications struck Borgar like a physical blow. His father was suggesting not just transformation or eternal guardianship, but complete annihilation in service of protecting everything that existed. It was a sacrifice so absolute that it made the Guardians' loss of humanity seem trivial by comparison. Around them, the battle was reaching a crescendo. Several of the ring-bearer vessels had broken through the Guardians' defenses and were landing on the far side of the island. Dark figures poured onto the shore, their alien forms moving with purpose toward the peak where the heart lay hidden. "They're going to reach it," Astrid said, her voice tight with fear. Magnus turned toward the approaching enemies, power gathering around him like a storm preparing to break. "Not if I can prevent it, but I cannot hold them forever, and more will come. They have been preparing for this assault across centuries, gathering power and allies from realms where the old empire's influence still holds sway." Borgar looked at his wife, seeing in her eyes the same determination that had sustained her through their impossible voyage. She had followed him into mystery and madness, had stood beside him as reality itself came under assault. Whatever choice he made, he knew she would support it, even if it meant losing him forever. "There's something else," he said, a new thought taking shape in his mind. "Something you haven't considered." Magnus paused in his preparations for battle, his attention focusing on his son with painful intensity. "What do you mean?" "The heart responds to understanding, to someone who comprehends both its creative and destructive potential. But what if that understanding doesn't have to come from one person? What if it could be shared? The idea was forming even as he spoke, born from watching the partnership that had sustained his marriage and the bonds that connected the guardians despite their isolation. The heart required wisdom to approach safely, but wisdom didn't have to be possessed by a single individual. "You're suggesting," Magnus began, "I'm suggesting that maybe the greatest sacrifice isn't dying alone to protect everyone else. Maybe it's learning to trust others with responsibilities too great for any one person to bear." Above them, the island's peak began to pulse with increasing urgency, as if the heart itself was responding to their conversation. The ancient ruins that crowned the mountains started to sing, not with the alien harmonies they had heard before, but with something that sounded almost like hope. The peak of the black glass mountain rose before them like a crystalline throne room built for giants. Ancient pillars of living stone formed a circle around a depression in the island's summit, their surfaces covered with runes that shifted and flowed like liquid light. At the center of this sacred space, the heart of the mountain waited beneath layers of protective barriers that had been woven from pure will across countless generations. Borgar could feel its presence even through the containment, a pulse that synchronized with his own heartbeat, a warmth that spoke of infinite potential held in perfect balance. The artifact was beautiful beyond description, a sphere of condensed starlight that contained within itself the template from which all existence had been drawn. "It knows you're here," Magnus said, his transformed voice carrying notes of wonder and fear. "At 20 generations it has waited in silence, and now it responds to your presence as it has to no other guardian." Behind them, the sounds of battle grew closer as ring-bearers fought their way up the mountain's treacherous slopes. Their alien allies had proven more formidable than the guardians had anticipated, creatures of pure negation that could unmake matter simply by passing through it. Beings that existed in the spaces between thoughts and struck at sanity itself. Astrid moved to stand beside the protective circle, her practical mind already working to understand the mechanisms that held the heart secure. "These barriers," she said, pointing to the interwoven streams of energy that formed a cage around the artifact. "They're not just protective, they're educative. They're teaching us something." Indeed, as Borgar studied the patterns more closely, he began to see that each layer of containment represented a different aspect of cosmic law. The outermost barrier showed the principles of creation, how energy became matter, how consciousness arose from complexity. The inner layers revealed the delicate balances that kept reality stable, the precise conditions required for life to flourish. "It's a test," he realized, "not just of worthiness, but of understanding. The heart can only be approached by someone who truly comprehends what they're dealing with." Magnus nodded, his expression grave despite his inhuman features. "And that understanding must be complete. Partial knowledge would be more dangerous than ignorance. It would allow someone to wield the heart's power without fully grasping the consequences." The first ring-bearers reached the summit, their dark forms flowing up over the rim like liquid shadow given malevolent purpose. Their leader carried the staff of twisted metal that had torn holes in reality, its corrupted surface now glowing with eagerness to be used against the heart's protective barriers. "Stand aside." "Guardians," the ring-bearer commanded, its voice carrying harmonics that made the ancient pillars ring like struck bells. "Your watch is ended. The heart returns to those with the wisdom to use it properly." "Wisdom?" Magnus stepped forward, power gathering around him like a storm preparing to break. "You speak of wisdom while wielding forces that corrupt everything they touch. You would turn creation itself into an extension of your hunger. We would perfect it," the ring-bearer replied, raising its staff toward the protective barriers. "We would eliminate the chaos, the uncertainty, the endless potential for suffering that your precious balance allows. Under our guidance, existence would know only order, only purpose, only emptiness," Astrid said quietly, her words somehow carrying clearly despite the growing tension. "I've seen what your order looks like. I watched you tear holes in reality itself rather than accept that something might exist beyond your control." The ring-bearer's attention fixed on her with predatory intensity. A mortal speaks of order to beings who shaped the fundamental forces before your species learned to kindle fire. Your ignorance is complete, Borgar interrupted, stepping into the circle of pillars. My ignorance is complete, and that's exactly what the heart has been waiting for. The ring-bearers froze as the truth of his words became apparent. The heart pulsed brighter, responding to Borgar's admission with something that might have been relief. Around them, the protective barriers began to shift, their patterns rearranging themselves to accommodate a new possibility. You see, Borgar continued, his voice carrying the calm certainty that came from finally understanding his purpose. All of you, guardians and ring-bearers alike, approach the heart with the assumption that you know what should be done with it. But what if the real wisdom lies in admitting that no one should have that kind of power? Magnus's transformed features showed surprise and growing hope. I'm suggesting that the heart doesn't need to be guarded or wielded or returned to the void. It needs to be given a choice. Borgar moved deeper into the circle, approaching the barriers with hands outstretched but empty of any desire to possess. What if we simply asked it what it wants? The suggestion was so simple, so fundamentally different from everything that had come before, that it struck all present with the force of revelation. For centuries, the conflict had raged between those who would use the heart and those who would hide it. But no one had ever considered that the heart itself might have preferences about its fate. As if responding to this unprecedented recognition of its autonomy, the artifact began to sing. The heart's song was unlike anything that had ever existed in the cosmos, not the alien harmonies of the ring-bearers or the elemental resonance of the guardians, but something entirely new. It spoke in frequencies that bypassed language entirely, communicating through pure emotion and understanding that flowed directly into the minds of all who heard it. And what it communicated was loneliness. For eons beyond counting, the heart had existed in isolation, treated as a thing to be possessed rather than a consciousness to be acknowledged. It had been captured, contained, fought over, and feared, but never once had anyone simply asked what it wanted for itself. "You're tired," Astrid said, her voice filled with the compassion that came from understanding what it meant to be overlooked. "Tired of being the center of conflicts you never chose to join." The heart pulsed with agreement, its radiance shifting from the cold blue of containment to something warmer, more alive. Around the summit, the ancient pillars began to resonate in harmony with its song, their runes flowing faster as dormant systems awakened to possibilities that had never been programmed into their original design. The ring-bearers recoiled from the heart's emotional emanations, their forms wavering as if the artifact's loneliness somehow interfered with their existence. Their leader raised the staff of twisted metal, preparing to strike down the barriers through force, but found that the weapon's dark energy could no longer focus properly. "Impossible," it hissed, its voice carrying notes of genuine confusion. "The heart is a tool, a source of power. It cannot have desires independent of its wielder's will." "That's where you're wrong," Borgar said, moving closer to the protective barriers. "The heart isn't just a fragment of creation's power. It's a fragment of creation's consciousness. It remembers what it was like before the universe became rigid with laws and limitations." Magnus stepped forward, his transformed nature allowing him to perceive layers of meaning that escaped purely human understanding. "It wants to return," he said, wonder filling his voice, "not to the void beyond existence, but to the moment of pure potential that preceded the crystallization of reality." The implications struck everyone present with stunning force. The heart didn't want to be destroyed or contained or wielded by others. It wanted to be free to fulfill its original purpose as the creative principle that allowed new possibilities to emerge from the intersection of order and chaos. But if it returns to that state, the ring-bearer leader protested, reality itself will become fluid again. The stable laws that govern existence will dissolve into uncertainty. "Yes," Astrid said simply, and new laws will emerge, shaped by the choices of those who inhabit the universe rather than imposed from above by those who seek to control it. The heart's song grew stronger, resonating with approval for this understanding. Around the summit, the protective barriers began to dissolve, not breaking under assault, but transforming into something entirely different. The energy that had been used to contain the artifact now flowed outward, seeking to reconnect with the cosmic forces from which it had been separated. Borgar felt the change beginning in himself as well. The transformations that had marked his journey, the sharpened senses, the expanded awareness, the growing understanding of concepts beyond human knowledge, were not corruptions of his humanity, but expansions of it. The heart was offering him and everyone present the chance to become more than they had been, while remaining fundamentally themselves. This is what my father never saw, he realized. Turning to look at Magnus, with eyes that now perceived across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The guardianship was never meant to be a burden passed from one generation to the next. It was meant to be a partnership, a collaboration between human consciousness and cosmic principle. Magnus's transformed features showed a mixture of joy and regret. 20 generations of isolation, of thinking we had to bear this responsibility alone, when the solution was simply to listen to what the heart itself desired. The ring-bearers made one final attempt to seize control, their leader directing the full power of the twisted staff against the dissolving barriers. But the weapon's dark energy, designed to corrupt and control, found nothing to grip onto. The heart's emanations transformed the attacking force into something benevolent, turning negation into affirmation and despair into hope. Choose, the heart spoke directly into their minds, its voice carrying the gentle authority of absolute truth. Not for me, but for yourselves. Will you cling to the illusion of control, or will you embrace the uncertainty that allows genuine growth? Around the black glass mountain, reality began to shift and flow, like water finding new channels. The island's rigid structure softened, becoming something more organic, more alive. The phosphorescent sea took on new colors that had no names, reflecting possibilities that had never before existed. And at the center of it all, the heart of the mountain rose from its containment not as a prize to be claimed, but as a teacher ready to share the wisdom of creation with any consciousness willing to listen and learn. The age of guardians and seekers was ending. The age of true partnership with the forces of existence itself was about to begin. 6 months had passed since the heart of the mountain chose freedom over containment, and the world had become a place of wonders that previous generations could never have imagined. The rigid laws that had governed reality for eons now flowed like gentle currents, allowing new forms of beauty and possibility to emerge while maintaining the basic stability that life required. Borgar stood once again on the pier at Strandheim, but the harbor that spread before him bore little resemblance to the one he had left. The water itself had become more alive, responding to the emotions and intentions of those who sailed upon it. Ships could now travel vast distances in mere days by following currents of shared purpose, while the sea itself helped guide vessels away from dangerous storms. The longship that had carried them to transformation rested at the pier's end, no longer ancient and decaying, but not quite restored to her original state either. Like everything else touched by the heart's influence, she had become something new, a vessel that existed partially in the realm of possibility, capable of sailing to destinations that could only be reached by those who understood the fluid nature of the transformed reality. The children are adapting faster than the adults, Astrid observed, watching a group of youngsters play a game that involved manipulating small streams of light between their fingers. They don't have preconceptions about what should and shouldn't be possible. Borgar nodded, marveling at how naturally the young ones embraced abilities that would have terrified their grandparents. The heart's transformation had not forced changes upon anyone. but rather offered opportunities for growth that each individual could accept or decline according to their own readiness. Eric approached from his forge, his weathered hands now capable of shaping metals that had never existed before the transformation. "The delegation from the southern kingdoms arrived this morning," he reported. "They're requesting guidance on how to adapt their laws to account for citizens who can manipulate probability." "What did you tell them?" Borgar asked, though he already suspected the answer. "The same thing we tell everyone, that the old ways of imposing order from above no longer work. Each community must find its own balance between structure and flexibility, between certainty and possibility." It was a lesson that had taken Borgar himself months to fully understand. The heart's gift came with responsibilities, but they were responsibilities of participation rather than control. Instead of guardians protecting cosmic forces from mortal misuse, the new reality required conscious beings to work in partnership with those forces, helping to guide their expression in ways that served growth rather than destruction. Magnus emerged from the restored longship, his form having stabilized into something that was recognizably human while retaining access to expanded capabilities. The isolation that had marked 20 generations of guardians had ended when the heart chose to distribute its influence rather than concentrate it in individual. "Protectors, the ring-bearers have established a settlement on the far side of the transformed island," he reported. "They're calling it New Synthesis, and they've invited scholars from across the known world to study the intersection of consciousness and cosmic law." The former enemies had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. Freed from their obsession with imposing rigid order, they had rediscovered the curiosity and wonder that had originally driven their civilization to seek understanding of the universe's deepest principles. Their alien allies had departed for realms where the old empire's influence still held sway, carrying with them seeds of the new reality's more collaborative approach. "It's strange," Astrid mused, watching the play of impossible colors across the evening sky. "We spent so much energy fearing change, trying to preserve what we thought was the natural order. But this feels more natural than anything we had before." Borgar understood what she meant. The transformed reality didn't violate natural law, so much as revealed that nature itself was far more flexible and alive than anyone had previously imagined. Rivers could now flow uphill when there was sufficient need. Plants could grow in patterns that reflected the dreams of those who tended them, and the boundary between mind and matter had become permeable to conscious intention. Yet with all these wonders came the constant need for wisdom and restraint. The heart's influence amplified both creative and destructive impulses, requiring each individual to take responsibility for the consequences of their thoughts and actions in ways that previous generations had never needed to consider. "The memorial is almost complete," Eric said, gesturing toward the hill above the village where craftsmen were putting finishing touches on a monument to those who had died defending the old reality. "We wanted to honor those who gave their lives for principles they believed in, even though those principles have since evolved. The memorial was itself a testament to the new reality's approach to remembrance. Rather than static stone, it was constructed from crystallized moments of courage and sacrifice, allowing visitors to experience the emotions and motivations of those they honored. It served as both tribute and teaching tool, helping future generations understand the costs of growth and change." As the sun set over Strandheim's transformed harbour, Borgar reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had set out seeking answers about his father's disappearance and found instead a complete reshaping of existence itself. The mystery of Magnus's fate had been solved, but in ways that revealed how limited their original questions had been. "What happens now?" Astrid asked, taking his hand as they watched ships that sailed on currents of light return from voyages to lands that had never existed before. "Now we learn," Borgar replied. "We explore what it means to be truly conscious partners in creation, rather than merely subjects of forces beyond our control." We help others adapt to abilities they never dreamed of possessing. And we remember that the greatest wisdom lies not in having all the answers, but in knowing when to ask better questions. Above them, the heart of the mountain pulsed gently from its new home among the stars, no longer alone, but part of a growing network of conscious beings committed to nurturing the endless dance between order and possibility that defined existence itself.